Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the very first event of the 32nd Miami Book Fair. Hard to believe that it's been 32 years. And I'm Mitchell Kaplan. On behalf of all of us at the Book Fair, I want to welcome you to this remarkable event. I can never stand up here on the first day of the Book Fair, or the second, or the 8th, or whenever, without thanking all the marvelous people at Miami-Dade College for giving us the gift of the book fair. Join me in giving them a big round of applause. I particularly would like to thank Dr. Eduardo Padron, who couldn't be here this evening, but I also would like to thank the provost of the college, Rolando Montoya, who's here, I know, somewhere. Dr. Montoya, there he is with. And I'm going to give a shout out to his lovely wife as well, because she's the one who taught my daughter in first grade and set her on the road to where she is now. So thank you both for being a part of my life and the life of all of us here at Miami-Dade College. This has been a kind of very, I know, sad few days for all of us who've been watching the news, particularly those of us here at the book fair who have always worked very, very closely with the French consulate here in Miami. We had a program where we highlighted France at the book fair. We've had French authors here throughout the years. And the events of the last few days have been very sad ones. And our thoughts and our prayers and our hopes go out to everyone who's been touched by this horrific event. And I think it's appropriate to maybe have a moment of silence just as we meditate a little bit on what's happened. So why don't we do that right at this moment? Well, thank you. And I should say there are so many things happening this week. This is the very first one. We will be having a celebration in the atrium of Building 1 to kick off the fair immediately after this. And then, as you know, at 7 o'clock we have Patti Smith coming as well. And then tomorrow evening through Friday evening we have events in Spanish and in English all week. There's a fairgoer's guide you can pick up. But I suggest that you go to the website, miamibookfair.com, to get the most up-to-date information, because there have been, in any event where you have 600 writers, there are always some changes. And there have been at this year's fair as well. We also want to highlight, before we get going, the fact that we want all of you to feel a part of this fair and to have some ownership of the fair. And the best way of doing that is to become a friend of the fair. There's information out front about how you can become a friend of the fair. We're also engaging in something that we haven't done before, and that is a very simple way of donating to the Miami Book Fair to ensure its future for the next 32 years, is by texting book, the word book, to the number 501-501, and you will get a $10 deduction on your next phone bill. But that $10 will go to the Miami Book Fair. So we thank you if you decide to do that. That's book at 501-501. I also want to mention that some of you may not know her, or may not have remembered her, but for many years she was what we call she was the hostess of Chapman for many, many years. Her name is, and in our hearts, Barbara Skegan. And just a few months ago, Barbara died, unfortunately. She's a longtime member of the board of directors, one of the founders of the fair, and we want to just acknowledge the memory of Barbara Skegan as well tonight. And I personally want to thank the staff of the Miami Book Fair. Would the whole staff stand if you're here or involved in the book fair? They're out running around keeping tents from blowing away, I'm sure. But I do see Lisette Mendez in the back. Lisette has been an amazing asset, and she's the program director of the fair, and we thank her. And there's Corey Lewis as well, who helps raise a ton of money, and Paula is here as well. So we thank all of the staff for doing what they do. And you know, over 32 years, things change, but some things remain the same. And all of us who are amazing listeners of WDNA realize that it has remained the same for so many years. It has brought us and has been the voice of jazz on public radio. They are helping to sponsor tonight's event. And we are very, very fortunate to have Maggie Pelea, who's the general manager for WDNA, which is 88.9, to be moderating the event. As all of you know, WDNA is known worldwide as South Florida's premier jazz music station. Its mission is to provide quality music, arts, and cultural programming to all of us in South Florida and beyond. In an ever-changing radio landscape, as I said, WDNA remains committed to America's classical music being jazz, America's music, which is jazz, alternative voices, and the marriage of entertainment with enrichment. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Maggie Pelea.
Good evening, and thank you very much, Mitch, for such a wonderful introduction. For us, well, for me individually, the book fair is always the most wonderful event of the year. And as sponsors of WDNA, as readers, we have been very much involved with the book fair from day one. And I remember the nights of coming in with an evening before I had children, and so throughout that's more than 30 years ago now, so it's wonderful to be a part of it. And it's very wonderful to be able to introduce this afternoon's authors, because you might think that they're disparate in some ways, but they're really not. Paquito de Rivera, winner of 14 Grammys, is celebrated for both his artistry in Latin jazz and his wonderful achievements in classical music. The book this year, because he's had several at the fair, is Letters to Yeyito, Lessons from a Life in Music. A fascinating tour of Paquito's 6 decades-long journey in the arts, and a wonderful guidebook for aspiring artists everywhere. And this will be a wonderful conversations with Ilan Stavans, an essayist, cultural commentator, and teacher known for his insights on language and culture. And his latest book, Quixote, the Novel and the World, is really a groundbreaking cultural history of the most influential, the most frequently translated, and most imitated novel in history. And it's celebrating 400 years. It was written in 1605, and it's still a very current theme for many students of literature. And you might say, well, what does Yeyito have to do with Quixote? You know, these are characters that are idyllic, and the writers are funny and engaging and have a mastery of the literature, a mastery of the cultural and the linguistic in each one of their themes. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ilan Stavans and Paquito de Rivera. And we'll have some thought-provoking conversations on Quixote.
Believe it or not.
Well, it's an enormous pleasure to be here this afternoon with all of you. Thank you for coming. Thanks to the Miami Book Fair for hosting this event. I am thrilled to be here on stage with my old but always young friend, Paquito de Rivera, whom I know for many years and has been an inspiration to me throughout life because of his joie de vivre, his commitment to just exploring the free, willing way that music can transform an entire civilization. Paquito and I first met during a television show I hosted for many years in Boston, Massachusetts, and he was one of the early guests, and we struck a friendship, and that friendship has lasted through a series of vicissitudes through time, and it is wonderful now to come back on stage and be in Miami. Let me tell you what we're hoping to accomplish here. We would like to do several things at once. We want to talk about, or I want to talk about Paquito's new memoir, Letters to Yeyito, which I find to be an extraordinary manual of life and how to look at jazz as a way to inspire young and old. And we also want to be talking about the 400th anniversary of Don Quixote. This is, as was said in the introduction, the 400th centennial of the book, and it's a book that I love passionately, maybe even obsessively, and so I am going to be connecting Don Quixote and the Quixotic with jazz, hopefully interweaving it in a seamless way. We'll see how it works. But I want to start with Yeyito, and Paquito, just delighted to have you here. Let me ask you first, there is something in you that I find striking, and that is that aside from your itinerant life, the fact that you're always traveling, and the fact that you have this commitment to your music and to the two instruments that you play all the time, you are also a writer. You have written throughout your career. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your relationship with the English language, with the Spanish language, and with the act and art of writing.
I was introduced by my father at the same time to music and literature, almost at the same time. You know, I grew up, you know, he was an avid reader. He was always reading something. He went to school only to the 6th grade. And even he learned to play the saxophone by himself. He found somebody who teach him the fingering. But he was reading all the time. He gave me my first book, who was, of course, Salgari, Emilio Salgari, El Pirata Negro, El Tigre de la Malasia, Sandokan, and all that thing. Of course, Jules Verne. And then El Quixote. And I was fascinated by El Quixote. And what I never dreamed is that I was going to be presenting a book together with the book about El Quixote.
Yeah.
And I never dreamed that I was going to be in the same stage talking about literature. What fantastic writer that you are.
Thank you.
So I mean, I'm also an inspiration. Ilan was the person who forced me to write in English for the first time. He wanted to publish my first book, se llama Mi Vida Sexual. Yeah. If you don't like the title, you have somebody to blame here. That was the idea of Nacho Jack. You know, tú debías poner todo eso junto y que la gente se entere de tu vida sexual. Yo digo, ¿cómo? So he encouraged me to write, to put more material into that book and publish it in English. And now this is my second book in English, and was inspired by him. And it's also a coincidence. Many years ago, I was 16, 17 years old, and I was traveling with the most popular orchestra in Cuba, con la Orquesta Cubana de Música Moderna. And there was apparently a music student that sent me a note and said, I wonder if you recommend me to pursue a career as a musician. What do you think about it? In those days, yo estaba pasándola más bien que el cara. So I didn't know, and I didn't have enough, didn't dare to recommend nothing to nobody. When you are 16 years old, you are supposed to receive advice, not to give advice. That is one reason. The second reason was that there was no returning address in that note. So I had the chance to return, to answer that note maybe 55 years later, thanks to Ilan Stavans, who called me and said, I want you to write a book about, ¿cómo se dice en inglés? Un epistolario, ¿no?
Yeah, like a series of letters.
A series of letters to an imaginary music student. Wow, it took me 55 years back, and this is the book that you have in your hands now.
In the Paquito, so now that you are at this stage of life, maybe you can summarize for the audience, what is it that you can tell young, aspiring jazz musicians who are contemplating the possibility of maybe embarking on a career in jazz? What shouldn't they do? What should they do? In what way should their dream be projected?
Well, I will tell you that coming from a totally anti-democratic system that I coming from, when I recommend things, it's only a suggestion. It's only my opinion. It's not an imposition, because I don't believe that you have to. Everybody doesn't have to adapt to your mentality, to their mentality. Every person, every single person has their own set of mind. So all I do is suggestion what I did and what I did and what I did wrong also. Yeah. So don't repeat 2 times, the same mistake, which is very common in human beings and especially in musicians.
How different would your career be had you been young right now? Do you think the same opportunities would be out there? Have opportunities for jazz musicians multiplied in the last few years? Have they been reduced? Coming from where you come, in what way, looking back, is your career the product of the time you left Cuba, you came to the United States, the explosion of Latin jazz, and so on, and how different it is from now?
I have to say that I came here, I was in the right place at the right time. When I came to New York, there was you can call it a revival of what they call Latin jazz. That was fundamentally Afro-Cuban jazz. Then in those days, we started even using elements of the Brazilian music or the Venezuelan music and of the tangos, thanks to the music mainly of Astor Piazzolla. So I was in the right place at the right time, and I talk about it in that book also. And every person is different, and every time is different. Yeah. Once I commented to Wynton Marsalis, I told him, Wynton, how is it possible that here the kids have everything, the book, the recording, the instrument, everything economically, everything, and they don't learn? Coño, qué brutos son.
You took the microphone.
Yeah. And Wynton is a very wise person. He told me, you know something? Because I thought in my day, when I was studying and with Castro in power and all that, we didn't have the book. All we had was Willis Carnover's program, The Voice of America. He was even forbidden to listen to it. So he told me, you know what happened? It doesn't matter the quantity of books or the quality of books you have. You learn only, first, if you have the talent. And second, if you want to learn, you need the dedication. It's the most important thing in life. It's very important. Of course, the combination of dedication and talent produce people like Wynton Marsalis. You don't find that every day, But it's Jose Ingeniero say, the wonderful Argentinian writer, he say that talent without studies is like a garden with no gardener. So it's a combination of all that, and every situation is different. You cannot generalize.
As you know, I love dictionaries, and I love the fact that they even exist. That we have a catalog of words, a book that contains every single word described, and that somebody has taken the time and the effort to describe those words. So I want you, Paquito, to describe as succinctly as you can what jazz is.
Say that again.
Is that the definition?
Oh, you mean
What is jazz? How do you define jazz?
The best definition I ever heard of jazz was given by Herbie Hancock in the early 70s. Herbie is a very wise person. And somebody did the same question to him. What do you think, what is jazz? We're talking about 70, we already had free jazz and bebop and swing and all the evolution, Latin jazz and blah, blah, blah. So he said, up to this point, jazz is something impossible to define and very easy to recognize.
I love that definition. In fact, I use the same definition for Spanglish.
You know that he wrote a dictionary of Spanglish. He dared to do that.
Because I think Spanglish is just like jazz. It's everywhere, and it's so difficult to define, but it's a way of approaching the world. It's a disposition, and it's also a culture unto its own.
Well, the language is something just is made for communicate. That's it.
Yeah.
You know. So if it's useful, you know, you use those words. And the first time I heard talking in Spanish in Spanglish, was to Rey Mantilla, a conguero that went there with Stan Getz and Dizzy Gillespie to Havana in 1977. And I could not believe what I heard. He said, I approached him in English. I understand that you are Puerto Rican. He said, no, yo no soy boricua. My father is from Peru, and then mi mamá fue la que nació en el Bronx. Pero yo, I like Cuban music very much, entonces me metí en esto porque si no, I was... What type of language is that you're talking about? Me dijo, mulato, eso es Spanglish. Everybody in Nueva York habla la mierda esta. And I fall in love with that. It's a wonderful language, man.
It's a wonderful language. Do you think we'll reach a point, Paquito, where in the near or not so far future, people are not going to be angry about Spanglish? People are going to accept it, even as a language?
Mira, Spanish is here to stay. It's not living anywhere. So it's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
It's very practical. Of course, you should learn how to speak the language correctly, you know, to both separated. But no hay nada más lindo que una mulata, chico. So,
El mestizaje.
y el mestizaje, claro que sí.
So I'm going to come back to English and Spanish, but I want to ask you about your loyalty, or maybe you can describe it in another way, to two instruments, to the clarinet and to the saxophone. I wonder if you perceive one to be masculine and the other feminine, or one to present certain elements to you that are clearly defined, that are very different from the other one. Yeah. And if there are moments of the day or moments in your life where you have a more affinity toward the clarinet than you have to the sax, tell me the relationship between the two.
That
is it like having two wives?
Yeah, well, if you are a Mormon or Muslim, you know, yeah, that's great. You know that is a very good question, because that is included in that book. I think there is a chapter precisely called The Saxophone and the Clarinet.
Right.
They are cousins. Of course, the saxophone is younger. Last year we were celebrating the 200th anniversary of the inventor of that marvel, which is the saxophone. That is a wonderful instrument. There is no such a thing as an easy instrument. That doesn't exist. If you want to play like Ed Calle or people like that, you have to study and. But the saxophone is a lot more reasonable. You leave a saxophone for a little while and then you pick it up and you can get a sound out of it. It makes sense, you know. Maybe you cannot play like Charlie Parker, but you can go around. The clarinet, ay. Always I say that the clarinet is a female instrument because you never know what she's thinking. You know, and there is Frank West was a very intelligent and funny man, and he hated the clarinet, and I don't blame him. And I love it, but he said, I hate that shit. He didn't. And he said that the clarinet was invented, you know, that you can disassemble the clarinet. It comes in parts, you know, to put it in the case. And Frank West said that the clarinet was invented by 5 men that never met.
And just as you were talking about the clarinet being female, do you think that a female musician approaches the clarinet and or the saxophone differently than you do?
No, I don't. Well, it's always a feminine touch, maybe, but no. There is more and more female players. For example, there is one clarinet player that I admire deeply, and she looks beautiful too, which is Anat Cohen from Tel Aviv, Israel. And she played, you know, this can sound like an insult, but she played the clarinet like a man. Now, these days you cannot say that because it's politically incorrect. But in my case, what I meant is that she can play that instrument like any other being. So they are, women are getting more and more involved in jazz music and doing very well. Pianists, very good female pianists these days in the jazz world.
And changing
contrabass players, fantastic contrabass players. Anat Cohen had a contrabass player. She's from the Philippines, and she played the contrabass like Ray Brown. So it's not anymore the frontier for ladies.
Paquito, when I see you at Tanglewood, or when I see you at Carnegie Hall playing in the middle of the concert, what is your mind doing? When you're interpreting one of the pieces, does the train of thought stop, or is your mind active? Are you looking at the audience? Are you thinking about? Are you imagining things?
Oh, it depends on the piece you are playing. If you are playing a new piece that is complicated, know that you better take care of, pay attention to what you're doing, or can be a real disaster. But some of the pieces that you have already, in your fingers and all that, you can fly and that is the perfect stage. But I will tell you something else. Music is an abstract art. One of my best solos have been recorded when I was scared because I was not very, very sure what was happening. I was scared, and then, for example, I recorded a solo in a CD of Michel Camilo. The name of the piece, it was Michel Camilo Big Band. The name of the piece is Caribe, and it's a little tricky, that piece. And then I had to concentrate on that thing, and that is one of the best solos I ever recorded. So it's an abstract. It's like writing a novel. You don't know really what's going to happen at the end.
So if I could ask you now to again become a dictionary, how would you define the word improvisation?
You know that improvisation is exactly what the composers do, only that they have the time to think about it and put it down and change their mind. It's a composition. It's the same thing, only that when you are improvising in front of an audience, there is not a second opinion. You don't have a second chance. If it's bad, that's why some classical musicians are so afraid of improvising in public, because they are used to study the music, how it's written, to make their own interpretation and playing always the same. That is the grace of classical soloists. The grace of jazz people is to play always different. And it is a risk when you do that, Because sometimes you try something and it fails.
When do you leave the stage and you feel it was a bad concert? Were you in a bad mood that day? I sometimes, when I'm giving a lecture, I can leave the stage and think it wasn't my best day. I did not improvise in front of the audience in a way that I can get inspired in other occasions. What's a bad concert for you when you play?
When the drummer is playing too loud. I hate that. I deeply hate that.
Yeah.
I really hate it. Y es un mal mundial. It's not only in the jazz world, it's un mal mundial. El ruido. I wrote, do you know a magazine called Downbeat? Downbeat magazine is the most important or the most famous jazz magazine in the world. So I wrote this article, and it's called Alfred Nobel and the Invention of the Microphone. And I sent it to Modern Drummer magazine. That's another very famous magazine for those people called drummers. They refuse to publish it. And then I called them back and say, what happened? Why are you going to do this? You know, I was very serious. I did some research about Alfred Nobel and el tipo que inventó el micrófono and all that. They said, we are not going to publish that. And I said, why? They said, because that is insulting. It's insulting to say the truth. You know, what I was trying to compare is the guy who invented the dynamite, who was Alfred Nobel, to the guy, I don't remember his name, who invented the microphone. The microphone was invented to enhance the music, not to cover it. So, a bad concert is when they are playing too loud and there's nothing you can do about it. You know.
I want to get you back, before I say a few things about Don Quixote, I want to get you back to English and Spanish. If the clarinet is female, is Spanish female and English is male? Are there genders in this? Do you see these two languages as having different genders or no?
No, I never made that analysis. No, but
Is it easier to fall in love in Spanish, for instance?
Yeah, Spanish is a nice language, like Portuguese, especially for singing. The Portuguese is beautiful. But for example, there is some concept that for me don't make any sense. They say that the saxophone is the sexiest instrument. How come? It's crooked already. If you tell me the clarinet or something like that, the saxophone. No.
Yeah. I don't have a follow-up to that one. As I was saying at the beginning, this is the 400th anniversary of Don Quixote, and it strikes me, as you know, I love the novel. I love the fact that a novel can survive 400 years. I love to think of what that novel says about us. It was a novel written at a time where Cervantes was considered a second-rate writer, and now we think of that period as the Cervantes period. And I love it because of a number of different things about which I want to talk to you. But one of the things I would like to engage you in is about what lasts, what becomes classic, what outdoes time. I'm thinking of this because when the novel was published, many didn't think that this novel was going to last. There were going to be plays, comedias by Lope de Vega, and sonnets by Quevedo and de Góngora, and those are remembered, but Don Quixote eclipsed everything else. So I want to ask you, in music, what's a classic, and how does a piece survive?
I don't think I can define that, because only time can define that. It's the difference between an antique and an old thing. Yeah, so I remember that once I came with a very, very old car at home and showed it to my mother. And the price was a little up there, and I said, why you pay that type of money for that car? I said, no, because it's an antique. I said, I am an antique and they don't pay that much for me. She had a great sense of humor. But that happened all over the place, all the time. I remember when, in other era, Animal Farm by George Orwell,
Right.
that classic, that song that is a classic now, was refused by 5 publishers because was not very good, it was not very well written. That is a classic, man. That is a piece of art, Animal Farm.
But on the other hand, Paquito, we have to be honest, Don Quixote is not very well written. It's a classic, but it's a kind of rowdy, chaotic classic. There are sections that are very repetitive. It seems to me, and I have read it a few times, where Cervantes seems to have fallen asleep while he was writing, or he wanted to fill out some pages. He forgets things. For instance, Sancho's wife has different names in different chapters.
No
At
kidding.
one point, the donkey, the jumento, disappears, and you don't know what. And then he remembers, oh, I need to bring him back, and he puts it back. He didn't have an editor, and in my book, I imagine the manuscript arriving to a publisher today and being rejected because it's too big. Nobody would read such a long book, and because it has so many. So I think that very often a classic can be an imperfect book that time makes perfect.
Probably yes, but I will tell you something compared to music in this case. I was told that Villalobos, Ayrton Villalobos, the great Brazilian composer, now he's a classic. He used to write 2, 3, or 4 compositions at once. The guitar concerto, the Fantasia for saxophone, soprano saxophone. That's why, and watching TV. Watching TV in the, there was a theater director in New York called, I don't remember his name now. And he went to visit him in his hotel in New York. And he was writing with a bottle of something here that was not water. and here was one composition, here another, and here another thing at the same time, and watching football in the TV. That's why you can find phrases from the guitar concerto in the saxophone concerto, and vice versa, and all that, and repetitive and all that thing.
Yeah.
Especially when you write those. I suppose that when you write those long literary works, you start forgetting what you wrote before.
Yeah.
That happened to me also, but I am not Cervantes,
One of the beauties of Don Quixote is the fact that there's Don Quixote, the tall, slim, 50-ish dreamer, and then the short Sancho, bulky, always down to earth. If you read the book, it appears that we don't have a manuscript, and we don't have any correspondence or any diary, so we don't know what Cervantes was thinking when he was writing it. But we know that the very first few sections don't have Sancho. Sancho comes later on because he realizes that it's the only way to get the thoughts out of Don Quixote's mind by asking him all these questions. What do you think about this? And are these windmills or are these? So I wonder if you identify more, if you see these two, Sancho and Don Quixote, as very different. What do they represent, each of them for you? And if you identify more with one or with the other, or they are two sides of the same coin?
I think it's two sides of the same coin. But what I can tell you, we've been talking about that before, that couple inspires so many other couples in the future, so many. I think in Spanish they call la figura y la contrafigura. Pototo y Filomeno, qué sé yo, a thing like that. Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah. And C-3PO and R2-D2, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson,
and Watson, yeah.
Ernie and Bert.
He created that.
Yeah.
He created that. He's so inspiring,
It's amazing. And one of them
It's
represents...
a classic.
Yeah. One of them represents the dreamer, and the other one maybe represents the man who's more down to earth. And I think that one of the reasons why this book, it has 22 translations, full translations of Don Quixote have been made into English. I think that that the English language for that reason is richer in Don Quixote than Spanish. Because there are 22 ways to access that book. And we were talking before, the fact that almost every period has a different translator trying to understand what that book is about seems to me fascinating. There are some translators that get rid of certain chapters they don't like and publish the book without those chapters. In France, the last chapter in the 18th century, the last chapter was not translated because the translator didn't like Don Quixote to die, and he wanted to write another adventure. He sat down to write it, and he died before. But his student finished it, and for a long time the French thought that it was 3 volumes, not only 2. So translators become kind of part of the action.
Yeah, but you have to have guts to do that to such a monumental.
Cojones.
Ay, coño, yo no quería decirlo. Hay que tener unos timbales como los de Tito Puente para hacer una cosa así, coño. It's like taking a Beethoven symphony and say, well, the second movement is no good. Let's do the first and the third, and then in the middle, let's put something by Kenny G or something. You know, it's a monumental.
But some people do those things with classics. Recently, I don't know if you know about this, but somebody did Pride and Prejudice with zombies, or they put flying saucers. And I have heard about somebody who wants to do the same thing with the Don Quixote, but the Walking Dead. Do you think it's a bad idea that somebody will alter a classic and do whatever they want since it's in the public domain?
No, that I like, because you call that arranging. Yeah,
that's jazz.
That's different.
Yeah,
that is different. Yeah.
No, so walk me back or drive me back to the moment where you read Don Quixote for the first time.
Oh, I don't remember that. That happened many years ago, but I was. And I can remember, you know, the entire. I remember the Dulcinea del Toboso, but I don't have a. I have a general idea. I am saving my time to read it and go in el camino del Quijote.
Del Quijote.
Yeah, in Spain next year we will go together. Now
we'll go together. We'll do that together. Yeah. Now, do you want to play something connected with El Quijote?
You know who was many of us people that do jazz music are very Quixotesques. ¿Se dice así en inglés o es Quixotex?
Quixotic. Quixotic?
Quixotic, not exotic, that's something else.
It's connected.
And you know, a person who was very quixotic was Dizzy Gillespie. And there is a chapter in that book they are supposed to buy later on. And it's called Sherlock Holmes
in Havana.
And it's based in the real events. I went to my house and found a little note en un papel de cartucho. I don't know how to translate that. Paperback. And I said, Paquito, we have been looking for you. ¿Dónde estabas? I said, what is this? Dice no decía Quijote, Alonso Quijano. No, he didn't say that. He said Dizzy Gillespie. It had to be a joke. Then I went to la bodega en la esquina. El bodeguero told me, did you find the note? I said, what note? I said, there was a black guy here, you know, Joey black guy with big cheeks like that, dressed like Sherlock Holmes looking for you. I said, wow, that is Dizzy Gillespie, man. So it was really that there was a boat, a cruise.
That had made it to Havana.
Make it to Havana, and then of course the newspaper didn't say anything, and there was Dizzy Gillespie looking for me. That was really fantastic story, and it's reflected in that book. And I had the pleasure to work with Dizzy for many years, to be his friend. And he was Don Quixote, only that was a combination of the mentality of the Quixote and the size of Sancho Panza.
So you were telling me that maybe you would play something? You want to take your instrument, one of your instruments?
They stole it. No. I am going to improvise a little bit around something that now that we're talking about the Quixote. ¿Alguien recuerda aquí un grupo que llamado Los Cinco Latinos? That was a wonderful group, vocal group from Argentina. Estela Raval, que se llamaba ella, y Los Cinco Latinos. And they recorded a piece called El Quijote, precisamente. Decía, en un lugar de la Mancha, no, pero era algo así. Voy a improvisar. I'm going to improvise a little bit about El Quijote and Salt Peanuts by Dizzy Gillespie. Only that at the end I need some of your help. You know? Call and response. Stravinsky version.
We're going to open this for a few questions. There are, I think, microphones here and over here. We only have time for a few. If you want to stand online, and if you want to be brief. I think you paralyzed people with that beautiful Yes, yes.
I don't know if you remember this. We were walking to New York, and crossing the street, there was like a triangle. There was a little group playing, the drummer, a guitar player with two arms, and a guy playing saxophone.
The guitar player with what?
With two arms. The guitar have two arms.
Ah, I thought the guy with 2 arms.
Yeah, no. The guitar was two arms. The guitar with two arms. And the sax, the guy who was playing alto plays very well. I mean, really, we stand in front of him, and we were looking at him, we were listening, and I remember you turned to me and say, how come I'm famous in here? How come? And that's a story, to mention when you say how you were famous in here. You was famous because you're very talented. Your talent is something out of this world.
You know that anecdote. This is my dear friend Alberto Romero, one of the greatest photographers ever. That's him. Ese es mi fotógrafo de cabecera. And that anecdote is included in the book also, and it's called New York. I was walking New York, and I found this guy who now he's famous. His name is Vincent Herring. Fantastic play, disgusting. He plays so good. and then I saw that guy playing, with that drummer and a bass player and this young kid playing the alto saxophone. And I say, how is it possible that I am famous, man? I am going to die we are going to starve to death here with all these people. And it's that I returned home and told my mother, that I feel sorry for these musicians that they play in the street. These young people playing in the street. And my mother told me, you don't have to be sorry about that. Those guys, instead of practicing at home, they practice in the street and they pay him. Well, yeah, make a lot of sense. En vez de ponerte a soplar en la casa, sopla aquí y te eches dinero.
Yes, please.
Yeah, there's no doubt that you are the favorite musician of many people in the world. Now, what I would like to know is, who is your favorite musician?
I am going to respond to you with words of the great Ron Carter. He was asked, who is your main influence? And Ron Carter say, anyone who plays good. And it is another very important thing. You never end learning. When you think you are a finished musician, you are finished. That is something very important.
Yes.
You talked today about the Quixote and a novel that has been in the history of the mankind for more than 400 years. So my question is, I have the feeling that the Latin jazz has been forgotten in the music culture. So my question to you is, what would be necessary in order to the new generations to bring that Latin jazz and keep them for 400 more years?
I didn't understand the
You want to repeat the last part?
The question is how can we do, for the new generations, because the Latin jazz, I think, it stayed in the past. It didn't survive the new music or the new trends in music right now. So how can we do, or what would be your suggestions in order to keep the Latin jazz living in the future?
You say that
How to make the history of jazz and life in jazz survive the present time and go into the future, given that jazz, by its very nature, is about the present.
I don't agree with that.
Maybe that was part of my interpretation too. Exactly, but
I don't agree with that. Jazz is more alive than ever. If people keep listening to that other stuff that Duke Ellington say, there is only two kinds of music, good music and the other stuff. So the other stuff is what most people listen, but jazz is healthier than ever. Wynton Marsalis has created a monster enterprise called Jazz at Lincoln Center. And that has ramification all over the place. And they have ramification in San Francisco. They have the San Francisco Jazz Coalition, and of course in New Orleans and all over the place. When you go to Europe, they have a humongous jazz festival. In Japan, yo no me estoy muriendo de hambre tampoco.
Paquito, what is it that makes connect? Just take this thought a little further. What is Latin jazz? What kind of disposition do we have in our culture that is different from any other culture connected with jazz?
Well, many people have the opinion that Latin elements have been present there forever. General Morton spoke about what they call the Spanish tinge in American culture since the teens, in the 1911 or something like that. It has been always around there. Only that, there is a certain period, when the Machito Orchestra started doing the thing with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, then our revival in the 80s in New York, and then the explosion of Brazilian music and Piazzolla and the tango. But it has been always there.
But in a time, I was thinking as you were saying this, at a time, and I know there's another question, at a time when immigrants are often seen as a threat, the life of jazz has benefited enormously of the moving, the coming and going of immigrants.
You know what happened? The music of this country have to reflect and have been reflecting the multinational characteristic of this country. Yeah. That's why es como un ajiaco. Un ajiaco, everything that you put in it still is an ajiaco. So jazz is like an American ajiaco, como un sancocho americano. So we can use all those elements and still. The music of Louis Armstrong is as much jazz as the music of Tito Puente or Gato Barbieri or Chucho Valdés or Bebo Valdés. Mm-hmm. That is jazz music because the spirit of jazz is there. The fantastic creation. And it's a creation. Sometimes disgraces and tragedies bring beautiful things. The horrors of the slavery created the most beautiful musical phenomenon of the New World, jazz music. So anything you put in our ajiaco, está bien.
Pozole in Spanish, in
Pozole
Mexico.
in Mexico.
One last question and we're going to conclude with this.
Paquito, I'm just curious to know, you had mentioned how you dislike when the drumming is too loud. I dislike it also because then you can't appreciate the other individual instruments. As a member of the group, why can't you go to the drum and say, please tone it down a little bit?
In that case, I can cite James Moody. He said, the drummer, if your telephone doesn't ring, it's me. I am sick and tired to see the drummer say, give me more piano in my monitors. What are your brushes? So if you want to listen to the piano, pay softer, and then you listen to the piano, but give me more piano. And then they use air plugs. The music is to be heard, is not to not be here.
And you need to be able to appreciate the different instruments that are being played.
Yeah, and the balance, and that's a very good question.
Let's finish with this, Paquito. I've asked you to define and to turn yourself into a dictionary. Let me do one more. How do you define quixotic? Quixotesco, quixotic. I like your smile.
Wow, that I never thought about this, but that's a wonderful question. How, is somebody who wants to achieve something for the advance, not only of his, but everybody else. Jazz is very Quixotesque in the nice way. It's a perfect democracy, this music, because when you are playing a solo, the rest of the group is helping you. It's not that the real democracy that when they elect somebody, When they elect the president, even before he's elected, they try to bring him down. In jazz music, when a soloist is playing, even if he's bad, we try to get rid of him as soon as possible, but to look him good, you know. So Quixote style is very close to jazz music.
It has been marvelous to be with you. Thank you.
The same thing here. Ilan Stavans.
Ilan and Paquito, I thank you so much for opening the book fair. The marriage of music and literature, there's nothing better. Thank you so much. Both of our authors will be outside to my right, signing copies of their books. Their books are on sale to my left, and we'll see you for the rest of the week. Have a good evening.